Well, welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday evening. This is a webinar or meeting style, really, brought to you by the Department of Education in collaboration with Demonstrated Success. And we're here to help support the 21C programs. And this program offering tonight is positively influencing student behavior through our own behavior. So we're going to take a look actually at ourselves tonight and how we relate with students when we're addressing their behavior. So a slightly different take. Sometimes we just focus in on the negative student behaviors that are really challenging, and we will talk a little bit about that, but we're also going to tap into ourselves a little bit tonight as well. There we go. So we'll start with some introductions. I'll just show you this agenda. We'll talk a little bit about behavior being communication. We'll discuss some high leverage practices that will help support that positive behavior with students, and then we'll close. So just a few things before we really dig in. Again, we want to say thank you to the New Hampshire Department of Education for sponsoring this. And this really is an interactive session. So I know that we put that in the description of the webinar, but we really do mean that. So if you're comfortable turning your cameras on, we would love to see you. I understand maybe you're making dinner or maybe you're eating dinner, which is totally fine. But we would love to see your faces, and we would love for some participation today. I have a lot of questions to ask you, and I think you'll feel like it'll be a little bit more authentic opportunity and experience if we can kind of dialogue back and forth. You're definitely welcome to use the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute as well. So tomorrow, at some point tomorrow, you're going to receive a follow-up email from us with a link to your professional development certificate, so you can count this toward your hours, and the PowerPoint, which will have a link to the PowerPoint in the recording as well. And then at the end, we have a brief survey for you, so you can give us your feedback. Everything that we create is really based on your feedback. So we'll take that into account as we think about how we want to deliver this content in the future. So I think we might have one chat here.
It's just a comment.
Yeah.
We're good.
You're good.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. So I'm Lauren Mercier, and I work for Demonstrated Success. I come to DS with a background in public school education as a school counselor and a classroom teacher and an administrator. And so I've worked with students in grades K to 12. At Demonstrated Success, one of the groups in which I support is the 21 Century Learning Center programming. And so we've been working really closely with the program directors this year and site coordinators, working to strengthen your programs. So I'm also joined by Karen Matzo. Karen, do you want to give a little brief intro?
Hey guys, I am the Director of Professional Development, and hi. I'll let Lauren take it away.
Karen also works with the 21C program directors and site coordinators.
I do.
She's pretty well versed with 21C. And so this year we've just had a variety of offerings. You may have seen some recordings. We have done some restorative practice work with the group with 21C. We have been supporting literacy and mathematics. So again, sort of all aspects of your programming we've been working to support. And this is our last virtual offering of the year with this group. Great. So here are our objectives for today. I'd love for you to understand that adult behavior influences student behavior. And again, I would like for you to be able to explore some high leverage practices that are really going to help you support responding to behavior versus reacting to behavior. And then maybe some strategies that you can also share with some of your colleagues as well. All right, so behavior is communication. Here we go. We're going to dive right in. All right, so you can show me if you've got your camera on, or you can pop it in the chat, the number, but fist to 5, so fist to 5, negative behaviors get in the way of learning in my program. So 1 is a not so much, and a 5 is a lot. Negative behaviors get in the way. Where are we at? Show those fingers to me. So I
5. I see.
get a 5.
You can also write into the chat.
Yep. Good. Good. We've got a couple here. 4. Hey, Stacy. 4, 5. Yeah. Perfect. Good. A couple of 4s. Awesome. Yeah. So negative behaviors do get in the way, right? We know this. We work in school settings, and it can be really frustrating, especially when we've worked really hard to program for our students. And you're all in a unique situation as well, right? Because you've got kiddos coming to you after a really long day. And everybody's day is a little bit different. And then you've asked them to, they come to this space with you and you've worked hard again to prep for them. And to prepare your materials. And it is frustrating and upsetting when those negative behaviors arise and get in the way of what you've prepped. All right, so here's another thing I want to know from you. What are you seeing? So we know negative behaviors are getting in the way, but what kind of negative behaviors are you seeing that are really impacting progress at your school for your students? What do you see? You can unmute or you can use the chat. We're interactive tonight, so I'm going to keep you on your toes.
In Concord, at our youngest kids, we see a lot of hands-on.
Yep.
It starts on the playground. Stacy's saying physical aggression, so very similar.
Yep.
Defiance.
They can't keep their hands off each other, and it leads to trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, hi, Kathleen. Yeah. Defiance, right? I mean, not doing things, digging the heels in, refusal. And then you move into this power struggle piece, right? When you see some of those things from students, sometimes as adults, we engage in a little bit of that back and forth. Yeah, but I think the hands-on is definitely something that's pretty common. We were talking last week with the program directors and just the negative language and unkind language, and that came up a few times. And so I think we're experiencing that, as well. Yeah, exactly. Good. So people are just popping in the waiting rooms, but these are some of the things I think you're seeing in programs, right? We talked a little bit about it, but we're definitely seeing again that unkind language and toward each other, that rude, that disrespectful piece. I won't call out all of these, but refusal to participate in the social activities, sometimes depending upon the activity, but also refusal to participate in that academic component, right? Posturing sometimes, or threatening behaviors, the tantrums or the outbursts from some of our younger students. And these can be really, really challenging, right? That shutdown piece, again, it's at the end of a long day. So you actually may see some behaviors that may be in line with school day behaviors, but you actually may see some different behaviors in the after school program just based on your circumstances, right? And student circumstances as well after a long day. All right, so what do you think is really behind the behaviors that you're seeing? Why are kids behaving in this way? I mean, just your best thought, your best guess, 1 or 2 words. What's going on, do you think?
Too tired to self-regulate.
Yeah, so too tired or right, not having the skills to be able to self-regulate for some of these students. Yep. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I think things are going on at home that we don't know about. They might be hungry, tired.
Yeah.
They also some of these kids might have frustration in the learning process that then, if we're targeting our neediest kids at our after school programs, then some of these kids might have very frustrating academic days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Self-esteem, Allison's saying increased anxiety and poor boundaries at home. Role modeling at home.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting. We're going to talk a little bit later. We're going to come back to that boundary or that idea of kind of like, we call it code switching, right? So what's acceptable at home, but maybe not for the school setting. So we'll talk about that. We're actually going to talk a little bit about role modeling too, Stacy. So yeah, you guys are right on.
I think another big thing is there's no discipline. Some of the parents, it's easier just to give in and allow them to do what they want versus what really should be expected.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. Are you finding in your programs that the discipline, like during the school day that you're aware of, are your responses to behavior similar to your school's responses to behavior?
Mine are,
I think we
yes.
Okay, so yes, I did. Somebody cut out. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
I think we do our best, but we also don't have the same staff every day.
Right.
So sometimes the expectations of the staff or the routine gets switched up, not really on purpose, but
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think some programs are probably in pretty good alignment, and others maybe because of volume of sites or what have you. I mean, there's some pretty big, cities who have a lot of different sites. So I was curious about that piece of things because, you see some when we talk about expectations, if expectations are different during the school day, right, than they are after school and vice versa, that can be a little problematic. So yeah, so we really want to hone in on the fact that, student behavior really is communication. And we really have to understand that when we really peel back all the layers, the behavior is really going to communicate to us unmet needs and lagging skills. And so we can really focus better that way, and we can respond versus react when we can kind of take away that personalized component that sometimes we have with student behavior, because it's very frustrating, and we can say, okay, what is the unmet need and what is the lagging skill? And if we can practice drilling down to those levels and understanding that, we're going to be better able to respond to students. And so this acronym, this Everybody Eats, we're really understanding that, behavior is targeting like an escape. So are students behaving because our uptick in behavior because of wanting to escape from something, right? They don't want to participate in something. It's an avoidance, right? Is it attention seeking behavior? A tangible gain, like, a reward or not a reward, right? They're not able to get something. And then a sensory need, what is the sensory component perhaps that the student is seeking with the behavior? So when we're able to understand that piece, we can actually teach explicit skills. And so I know several times this year, we've talked about social emotional learning, right? And to be able to teach some of these skills explicitly to students. And SEL is really linked into behavior, right? So if we think about self-awareness and self-management, which are really important social emotional skills for students to have, we also understand that when our students have a good grasp of their self-awareness and they're able to identify their feelings and their emotions, and then they're able to, Sue mentioned it before, that regulation piece, they're able to manage, right, some of those big feelings, we're going to have more positive behavior from our students. So it all is connected to social emotional learning. And I know, I'm sure most of you actually, or probably all of you on the call are working with SEL in your programming, and your students are receiving some kind of social emotional learning support and or curriculum during their school day as well. So, knowing this and having awareness of this about honing in on the unmet need and the lagging skill, it really does help us with our patients. It helps us, come from a place of empathy with students, and it creates a little bit more space for us to respond, right, instead of reacting. And that's really, what I want you to focus on and help coach your staff along with, right? Just sometimes creating that space, creating your own boundary. If you don't have to respond right away, if you can take some time. In some cases, an immediate response is necessary. In other cases, we can step back, right? But it's really allowing yourself to take space.
Can I butt in for a second?
Yes.
Sure.
This is Carol Walsh. I'm 21C. I find that some of the work that the kids are getting, it has to be modified. Some of the things the kids are not able to do, even though they are in second grade, they're not there. Some of the kids, it's hard for them. Some of them cannot read properly. So modifying the work, I think, would be a great idea for some of the kids who can't do the work that is put in front of them.
Right, right. And so, yeah, so I was coming at this slide sort of like an unmet need or a lagging skill, socially and emotionally to kind of think about behavior, but we can absolutely use the same type of thought process for academics too. You're identifying some lagging skills for a student, so you know you need to make some changes, right, to the work that you're giving them, and that you're asking them to do. So absolutely. So once you can identify that, and then they will be able to hopefully complete whatever you've modified for them or differentiated in some capacity so that they're more successful too. So yeah, and then that will yield more positive behavior. So exactly, right? You're spot on. Good. So considering what you bring to the dynamic of the relationship is really important, right? Having clarity about your students' needs, being really confident in your approach. And I think sometimes the more we work with students, the more confident we become, right? And consistency is really important too. And that's you as an individual, but that's also in your programming too. And I hear you that sometimes you have different adults in the room, but as much as we can work with our staff to be consistent in the way we're responding to behavior, the more successful our students are going to be demonstrating this positive behavior, right? If we have a consistency in our own approach personally, but also in the whole staff approach. And then, creating these genuine and authentic opportunities to meet needs and teach the skills. So embedding some skill building in that academic work that you're doing. And we've talked a little bit about what that would look like through social emotional learning. Are you creating some collaborative work structures for your students so they're working with one another, talking with one another, learning from one another? And in that we have some social emotional skills too, right? Listening, the communication, eye contact, giving feedback. So we're really kind of looping it all in to support behavior, to support academics. So let's talk a little bit about some practices that will help us out, that you can use. And some of this will be new, some of it will be a reminder, some of it you'll see and you'll think maybe differently about role modeling, for example, or clear expectations. So these are the small handful that we'll talk about over the next few minutes. So we'll talk a little bit about role modeling. We'll hone in on relationships and relationship building. We'll discuss clarifying expectations for students and then responding, reflecting, and repairing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about being a role model. And so I've just written at the top, observational learning, and there's two ands, and role modeling are powerful tools, right? So our students are always watching us. And even when we think sometimes they're not, but they are always watching us. And so we always want to be the best role models that we can be. And you may be thinking, yes, of course, obviously, we know this and we want to be, but there's times where, we might not know. We might do something differently than what we say to students to do. And so we'll talk about that as we go, but I want you to think about, being role models for your students sort of in your whole community, right? In terms of your after school community, your program community, thinking about role modeling social emotional skills. So we just have talked a little bit about SEL. And so it's really important that you as adults feel good, hopefully, about your own social emotional skills, right? So that you can actually demonstrate, that let's come back to just self-awareness, right? You can demonstrate how to identify feelings. I feel frustrated when, right? And so you're using language that supports that. Professional skills, I'm thinking here, your role modeling organization, your role modeling, different skills like that a student would observe, right? Your materials are organized, they're labels. It's easy for students to access what they need in your program because you've thoughtfully created a space where students can be successful. Collaboration, you're role modeling that, communication, again, giving and receiving feedback is part of that. And so we've put, be the thermostat. So you want to set the tone, right? You really want to work to set the tone, versus, spiking real high or real low, right? If you were that thermometer. So you really want to be neutral with students and really set the tone in your program, or if you have a classroom within your program, right? You really want to work to be that thermostat. And another thing is, which I have another slide for this, but, matching your voice and your body language to the message that you're giving kids. So an example of this would be, these statements can sound different depending upon, what you're trying to communicate. So, this first one, how are you? How are you? Are you concerned, for the student, or how are you? I haven't seen them in so long. So it's really being intentional again about tone, about language, and because again, students are watching us. So it's really important that we're mindful and we're thoughtful about the tone that we're using and the language that we're using with students. So the do as I say, not as I do. And I mentioned that, I referenced that really briefly at the first slide, but, I'm wondering, in your program, what you've noticed about adults saying one thing and then perhaps doing something else. Has that ever happened in your program that maybe you've done it? I know I've done it. I'll share. What do you think?
Have you ever held a cup of coffee or a soda or something and talked about how snack time was over and there's no more eating?
Right.
Or checked your phone?
Yep.
And there's no phone
right out of your pocket. So those are a couple of examples, right, of when we would tell a student that they can't do something, but then we as adults sort of take liberties, right, and we do them instead, or we do them anyway. So it's not effective role modeling, right? But sometimes we do it. I always come in with my cup of coffee in a classroom. Always. Every morning, right? So that was what I would choose to do. Now, kids didn't have coffee, they didn't have sports drinks, they didn't have anything like that, water only. So not the best role modeling with that. But that would be one example. Anybody have anything else? Well, you're all good examples then. You're all good role models. So in my third question, tell me what you do to be a good role model. How do you role model, in what ways each day? Shout a couple things out.
I would say that you clean up after you eat, you throw away your items, you push in your chair, and you follow the expectations of the classroom.
Thanks, Lynn. Anybody else role model for their students?
Well, you do your best to stick to a routine. You show them how you've organized the day. And I don't know.
They're great examples. Yeah, thanks, Sue. We have something in the chat here. Yeah, not talking to other adults when it's time to be quiet. That's a great one. That's a great one. Yes. Apologizing when you make a mistake. Fabulous. I think that's great. Yeah, those are two. You're all giving really great responses. And I think the two in the chat are great. It's that happens all the time. Adults will kind of congregate together and they're chatting and kids are working on something. You've asked them to do it independently. And then there you are. Right. I love the apologizing. I think the more that we can do that for kids, right, the better off we are, right? Working through apologies with students and coaching them along how to do that. Yeah, not raising your voice. Right. Thermostat, right? You're going to set the tone. Yeah, good. Excellent. Not using the phone in front of kids. Yeah, that's an important one. That's an important one. Yep. Good. All right. So I bet you we'll get some good engagement here with relationship building. Because I know that, you know, you work hard to build relationships with students. Great. So, just this introductory statement that positive relationships really are essential to motivating behavioral change. And the skill of building relationships can be learned, right? And we can build relationships with all of our students, even the ones that really push our buttons, right? Sometimes we've got some nudgy behaviors and, you know, some students that we really have a hard time connecting with. But I really do believe that we can, you know, peel back layers and we really can form some type of relationship with all of our students. You know, you're going to potentially have hundreds or thousands of students over the course of your whole career, right? That you are going to know, and you are not going to have the same type of relationship with all of your students, right? Obviously, but you can have some type of relationship, right? You can have a friendly, and respectful relationship that reflects caring and concern with all of your students. So, you know, just some simple things as they walk into your program. And I don't know if you're able to do this in your space, but I'd love for you to consider, you know, waiting at the door for kids, welcoming them in, greeting them by their name, perhaps a high five and even a fist to five. You could use that again when they walk through the door so you can gauge where they're at, right? Remember, they're bringing their baggage from the day. So I may have someone coming in at a 1 and the next kid through the door is like a 5.5, right? He or she is just raring to go, super excited, but the student in front really had a tough day. So it's a nice way to quickly gauge from your students, you know, how they're feeling as they come to see you. Expressing interest, right? That is a very important thing to do. Identifying and celebrating their strengths, right? So again, we talked before, some of your programs are perhaps, you know, you've got those struggling students. And so if we're working on math, it may not be their strongest suit yet, right? But we can definitely hone in on something that they're doing well and celebrate even the small growth that they're making is really important. Reinforcing positive behaviors is a great way to help build relationships. Sharing a little bit of yourself. Obviously you keep your boundary and you're professional about it, but you can, if you're comfortable, right, you can share about pets that you have, perhaps your children, a sports game, theater that you went to see a show, music you like, the weather, right? I mean, so there's lots of different ways that you can share a little bit about yourself. You're not getting too personal, right? But you're tapping in and you're allowing kids to ask you questions, right? To kind of get to know you better. I like this one, listening without an agenda. That's really important too. You know, just kind of be relaxed with it, and you don't need to go necessarily in a certain direction. You may end up there, you may not, but, you know, have genuine conversations with kids and definitely have more positive versus negative, right? And so it's like, if we have to address a behavior, it's a lot easier when we've given a handful of positive comments, positive feedback, and then we give a redirection of behavior. We generally see the students respond better to that redirection because we've kind of deposited, if you will, like that positive piece. And we'll talk a little bit about what I just said in a second, but depositing kind of comments or whatnot, but or compliments or praise, you know, it's really important that we do that. And then have fun with your students. Not every day is a blast. Like, let's be honest, right? We know that some days are a lot harder than others. We're not sugarcoating anything, right? Student behavior is real and it's hard. And so we're just going to validate that, right? For sure. But working with kids is fun, right? So really try to hone into that element of enjoyment and fun with your students. All right, so this is a relationship piggy bank. All right. And so I just talked to you a little bit about a deposit, but what I want to kind of illustrate for you here and talk through this is that if we think about, building relationships, we think about it sort of like a piggy bank. And when we build relationships, it's about making deposits with students, right? It is all of the things we just talked about on the previous slide. It's in, praising students for positive behavior. It may be offering a compliment, a nonverbal or a verbal cue, your thumbs up, right? They've done something well, right? So you're validating their efforts. You're depositing those positive comments, that praise for students, because the more we deposit, the better off you're going to be when you have to ask your students to do something, right? And you have to make a withdrawal from your bank. So we ask kids to do things all day long, right? We ask kids to come to 21C after school and extend their school day by a few hours, right? To do more academic work. We ask students to do work that's hard, math, reading, whatever it may be, that is a harder area for them, right? We ask students to sit still, right? That can be hard. So there's a lot of things during your program, your couple of hours with kids, that you ask of students. And so you have to make withdrawals from your bank, right? So we want to focus on the positive, the deposits that we can make in that relationship bank, so that you can make a redirection, right, of behavior. You can address a negative behavior. But because we've got this relationship, it's easier to do that. All right. All right. So I'm going to ask you, thinking about a student, if you want to think about the piggy bank with a balance, right? You either have a high balance with a student or you have like a low balance with a student. What do you do, or what can you do to make relationship deposits with students? I'm just thinking, what do you do?
I think one of the relationship situations that I do is you may ask them for their opinion. What do you think about this? What do you think that we should maybe do tomorrow that could get everybody involved, or make their opinion important? So especially with the middle school kids, that they feel that they are part of the decision making and that we care about what they have to say.
Awesome. I love that. What else do you do to make relationship deposits? Got a couple in the chat. Let me take a quick look. Yeah, following up with them, giving choice. Yeah, choice is really important. Let me this bumped out. Hang on one second. Some of my kids really like a TV show, and we've built an inside joke around it. Okay, great. Yep. Following up with them, remembering things that they have mentioned or that they're interested in. Right, exactly. Making those connections with kids. Yeah, and you're in a unique position too in that after school programming. If kids see you often enough, you have an opportunity to develop even a different kind of relationship than perhaps like the school day teacher, right? So thinking about, and this is like the second bullet, but thinking about what you can do in your roles to connect students with like a low relationship piggy bank, right, to other school community peers and adults. So if you know that kids have not great relationships with other adults, in your roles, I would just encourage you to think about, what you can do as sort of that after school provider and after school support for students. You may be a nice kind of liaison, right, between the student and another adult in the school building, right? Because sometimes kids need a little assist with that, right? And making certain connections in their school day. So thinking about, what your role could be in that too, helping to facilitate that.
I was going to say something earlier and I kept saying it and then you kept speaking over me and then I realized I was muted. What I
Oh.
wanted to add to I'm so sorry, you guys. Ritual is a really good way of filling the piggy bank. So if somebody had written in the inside joke, well, you can expand upon that to make rituals within your group. There's handshakes and symbols and so I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, that's really, really great. Yeah, so this is the next kind of connection. So relationships are business of the brain, right? So they're all connected into brain function and to, the brain connected to the learning. So it's all connected here. And so what I thought I would do is, this is Dan Siegel, and he's just going to do a clip. You may have seen this, but it's a clip on the hand model of the brain. And so I'm going to actually escape from here because I have it all queued up for us over here, but let's watch this together and then we'll talk about it. Hang on one second.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist. And then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas. And the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Great. I really like that video. It's nice and simple, but it's a really important message. And here it is just labeled for you a little bit more clearly. But again, this is something that we can teach our students, right? And that is connected back to, we've talked a little bit today about self-awareness and self-management, right? And so we can teach our students about those feelings, right? And being self-aware and explicitly teaching those skills so that kids can identify, am I about to flip my lid, right? Or you as an adult can use that same language. And you can be aware too, right? Because it's not just students who flip their lids. Adults do too. And so, again, this is just a little bit more clear for you to see, but it is important to know that, positive relationships really do support, academic rigor and academic success. And that's what we're here to support students for after school. So we know that too much stress, whether it be physical stress or emotional stress, any kind of psychological stress is going to limit the brain's capacity to learn, right? And so we just heard a little bit about that. And so connection is going to reduce the stress. When you have connection with somebody, you have belonging in your environment, you have belonging among others. It is really going to help kids feel safe and secure, in your community, in your space. And it's going to prevent that amygdala hijacking, right? So that's the flipping the lid piece. And the positive relationships really, again, opening the brain up to learning and help us, those connections and the relationships will help us regulate. And oxytocin is going to help clear out the cortisol. So the oxytocin is that feel-good chemical in your body, right? And the cortisol is that stress chemical. So we want to make sure that we, have more of the feel-good chemicals flowing in the program versus those feelings of stress, overwhelm, and that too much feeling for kids and for adults. And your adults may feel that, you may feel that, again, when you're, dealing with so much student behavior, it's easy to go there. I've been there. It's easy to go there, right? So it's again, that level of self-awareness, even for you as the adult. So let's move into expectations. We're cruising to the finish line here. Expectations are really important, and clarifying them for behavior is super important in your community. Explaining purpose and benefits of your community expectations for students is very important. Again, you may have different expectations than school day expectations. So it's really important that you make those either connections with students, or you articulate the differences and why your expectations might be a little bit different. We want to make sure we break down expectations into core behaviors, and create, do you have rules in your program, or do you have more agreements? Do your kids help you with the rules, or do you have more standard rules? I'm just curious. I also can't see the chat, so hang on one second if you've chatted.
It's okay. I'm looking.
Yeah, I can't see it. My screen's now covering my toolbar. I was just thinking, somebody gave feedback about getting opinion, right? And creating agreements is really just that. It's, instead of using traditional rules that start with no and don't, it is an opportunity for students to co-create sort of expectations of how you want the group to function. And it's, we have expectations about language, and we would create a statement about language, right? It wouldn't say, don't swear, don't use bad words. It would be like, we use kind language with friends, or something to that, to that degree, but it's positive. And it takes into account feedback from students versus the adult making the rules. When we expect things from students, we want to check for understanding. Are they really with us or not? Right? Even if we are giving what we think is a simple explanation of something or direction, and we need to clarify with students to make sure they do understand what we're asking them to do. The more visuals you can use, the better off you are, especially with the younger students. Visuals are great. Setting goals is really important with our students. That can help clarify expectations as well. And then explicitly teaching, what you want to see. We've talked a little bit about that. I've used that word a few times today, but that does fall in line with the role modeling that we talked about earlier, and it's back here again. We definitely want to teach students, what we want them to do, right? And what we want to see from them. So even something so simple as like, if you have your kids circle up, for example, like either on a carpet, or they bring their chairs to form a circle in the center of your room, explicitly teaching them, like, this may sound silly, but how to bring their chair from perhaps the table that it's at to the open space in the center. You're going to show them how to carry their chair safely. You're going to show them how to walk safely. So that's that role modeling piece. That's explicit teaching of what we want to see. So that's just one small example, but you can use it for all of that. So what's your expectation around coming to your circle, right? How are you going to get there? and you're teaching kids how to do that. We talked very briefly, I mentioned code switching. So the skill of code switching actually involves changing language and behavior to match the environment. So I think this came up maybe when somebody said lack of maybe rules at home. I think it was something at home, the lack of. So, and Karen, feel free to jump in here too, because I think when we did this presentation together, you did some of this. But really with the code switching, it's like we know that things at home are different than things at school. But if you think about, we teaching our kids that we know things might be a little bit different, but this is how we do them at school. Just like, if you're at a restaurant, you may speak more, you may speak quietly at the table versus at home, you might not have that expectation. Or if you're out in a restaurant, you're probably not going to put your elbows on the table, but at home, you may have your elbows on the table. You may be like this at the table, so that would be like an example of code switching to the environment. So it's specific to like the culture or the context of the situation that you're in. And so that's really important to teach students that, I think that's part of it. Like what we expect of them at school may not be like, to your point earlier, what is expected at home. And so it is a real thing, right? And so we just have to kind of teach through that as best we can and understand that, as best we can. Karen, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, there's a cultural
Mm-hmm.
element to this, right? Yep. And just to remember that there are different cultural behaviors that we may or may not be aware of, that kids grow up with, that they bring with them to school, and they need to explicitly be taught how to code switch. In other words, that maybe we speak a different way at home or within my culture at home or culturally, right? And this is the expectation at school, so, just really funny, just a really quick, funny story. I was taught in California when I was really young, my first job, and one of the kids that I taught, he dropped his drawers and peed in the parking lot because he had never been to school before. And he didn't even live in a closed structure where he came from back in Mexico, and he didn't understand. So that's like a very extreme example of code switching, and you have lots of examples racially where there are kids often of color that are in homogeneous white settings where there are different ways of talking and communicating in their culture that they then most of the time code switch, and they come into the dominant white community and they change the way they articulate, and maybe they change their dialect or whatever. And so just another example.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're not going to answer all these, but these are just some, questions to reflect on for you all. Think about the expectations that you have of your students and how you've communicated those expectations, how you've explicitly taught those expectations. Some things will be easier for students to follow than others, hone into that, lean into that, and spend more time where you need to spend more time, right, on the things that are a little bit harder for students. What do you think? I will ask you this question though. What are some expectations that students are struggling with that you're seeing?
I notice a lot with the middle schools is minding their own business, trying to stay out of everybody else's business or trying to handle it themselves. And you try to address them with, I appreciate you, being involved in this, but perhaps next time that you should bring it to someone else's attention, because they take something little and they can end up making it turn into something bigger, because at this age they know everything and they know what they're doing. So that's a big issue that I deal with every day at Runlet.
Yeah, I have a middle schooler there too. Yeah, I get that. I feel you, Lynn. What else? I'm living that life. What other some expectations here?
Carol here. To some of the expectations that we're looking for is the same as during the day at school. The kids are following the rules at school during the day when they are there. And for some reason, when they come to 21C, it's quite different.
Mhm.
It's I mean, I feel like if the rules are set from the very beginning and the expectations are set from the very beginning, I feel like it would be um, expecting them to follow those rules.
Yep. So from the beginning of your program, you mean like right at the beginning of the year?
Yes, from the beginning of the year, that we set, and not only that, I think too that having meetings with the adults and like having everybody be on the same page, using the same language, expecting the same expectations from everybody, and I think that would be. I'm an RBT. And so I work with the RBT. I follow because I work with behavior kids during the day, and I feel like by setting those things and being consistent. Consistency is, I feel like, is key to it, where all the adults are on the same page and following the same rules, and not swaying from that. And I feel like once that is in place, I think that things run a little more smoother.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with you. Yeah, I think communication with your program staff, I think as much communication as 21C staff can have with school day staff, right? And talking about specific students, or just talking about, again, expectations. And there's a lot of expectations that are going to be similar, right? I mean, most of you are all in school buildings and it's an extension of the school day. So there are a lot of similar expectations. And sometimes kids think once they get to a different environment, right, everything's different. And it's not real school or whatever it is, and you may combat that a little bit. But yeah, definitely. It's getting out in front of it early is always helpful. And all is not lost if things are going awry in November. Like we can't say like, oh my gosh, I have to, it's never too late to reset. Right. We can always reset and we can always regroup, regardless of the time of year. So finally, let's wrap this up here with this last section of responding, reflecting, and repairing. Right. So supportive communities commit to responding to challenges, reflecting on experiences, and repairing all relationships. We've talked a lot in 21C this year about repair. We've talked about restorative practices. So this next section sort of falls in line with some of the other things that we've talked about. But here is just a little note about triggers. Triggers plus triggers plus triggers is going to equal escalation, right? And so student triggers or even our own adult triggers are going to be influenced by our own self-concept, perhaps our worldview, different experiences we've had, right? Different biases. And they might incite some really strong emotions from us or from our students. And they do get in the way, triggers do get in the way, or these big feelings get in the way of learning and then connection with others. So we talked a little about flipping the lid. We talked, Dan Siegel talked a little bit about that fight, flight, or freeze, right? That amygdala hijacking. And so this is all kind of coming back to that. And so we want to be aware of triggers for ourselves. We need to be aware of triggers for students. It's easier to be aware of those triggers when we know our students pretty well, right? Again, we talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to spend too much more time on the brain. You can read this, but it all comes back to the brain, right? And we have to understand that. And so I don't think kids wake up. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be bad today. I'm going to be naughty today. I'm going to get in trouble today. I don't think they come to 21C saying anything like that, but things happen that they can't manage. They don't have the skills to manage. And here comes the behavior. This is just an example for you of the conflict cycle. I'd love for you to kind of take a look at this when you get the slides. But again, it's that idea of that self-concept, your belief system, whatever it may be. And then this is sort of how things escalate, right? We start with the stressful incident. We've got our triggers going on. We have these feelings. There's a behavior that comes out. And then there's the reaction. There's that flip of the lid, right? And so this is the conflict cycle. It's pretty standard. If you think about a conflict that you've had with a student or another adult, it probably followed, in this way. So this is something that we can teach our students about as well. This is just something to be aware of. We want to respond. We want to not take things personally. And I know that's actually really hard because I've personalized a lot of things over the however many years, right? I mean, we have to work to let go of some of it. It is easier sometimes, it's harder other times. And I know this, and we're not perfect. We're not going to nail it every single time, but we do want to anticipate those triggers. We want to try to address behaviors as privately as we possibly can. Right. And we want to avoid that audience because remember, attention is one of those gains for kids. Right. So we want to try to remove the audience as much as we can. Focusing on feelings. Right. I feel frustrated when you is a great stem. Right. We can use that with kids. We can teach kids to use it, but we want to ask kids questions. We want to validate how they're feeling. We want to listen to them. And, as much as you can pull back on the language, I think the better off you'll be. I think we sometimes just say too much. We think we're doing the right thing because we're comforting them and we're talking, or we're going around in circles about what happened. But sometimes the less we say, the better off we'll be. Just remember your relationship bank. Right? We want to make sure that we are doing the best to make our deposits because we know we're going to have to make these withdrawals. And we know we want to connect with kids. The connection is going to help us regulate. It's going to help us with our sense of belonging. And we know that when students and adults are both calm, we can reflect better. Both of us can, right? We can talk about what's actually happened, right? And address any harm and repair it. Right. So that's really important to remain calm as best you can. This is a really quick strategy I'll share with you. It's the WOW strategy. And so this is a nice processing strategy with students. So the what's up component, that first W, is where we talk about, what's happened. We're asking kids, well, what happened? Well, then what? What were you feeling at the time, or what were you thinking at the time? Did you get the outcome that you wanted? Some students will be able to articulate that and some won't. So some will need kind of some further questioning, just kind of probing into what happened. We talked a little bit about apologies earlier. This doesn't necessarily require an apology, but you may end up getting one eventually. But that whole own up piece, what could you have done differently? Processing with students, and then what was the impact of your actions, right? And then what now? Like, what do we do now? So how can you repair the harm or the conflict, or the impact that it's had? And usually kids have to either, if it's something physical, right, they have to pick something up, put something back together, clean up perhaps. Or if it's with a person, we have to repair relationships with, if it's another student or another staff member. And then how can you help is a really important question to ask students. They may say, I don't know. And then again, I think it's okay to do some probing there, or give some potential options for kids so they can choose, right? Giving choice. We talked about choice, but some standard response is going to be, I don't know how you can help. Not sure. Right. And so that's when we don't want to stop that dialogue, especially if we're getting some information from kids. We want to keep moving it forward. So you may have to give them some ideas of how you can help. Don't wow angry. You got to take your space. We talked about space in one of the first slides, create space to respond. So don't do this strategy when you're mad. Write things down. Kids might give you a lot of information. It might help to come back to it another day. If you're not going to wow on the same day because it's the end of a session, or because you're too mad with students, this is another time where, really scribing down what has happened with the student, or what the behavior was, the outcome, or the consequences is really important. You might not get an absolute truth, right? We want to move in that direction, but don't get caught up, with that piece of it. We want to model the listening. We want to rephrase and we want to validate kids, and we want to stay focused on like what happened and not other things, right? We want to just stay focused on what has occurred and then fix it, right? Repair it, whether it's again physical or if it's a, a relationship type thing. So we're not going to respond as a large group, but I want you to think about perhaps a time where you may have responded poorly to student behavior. And then think about that response, and did that response impact your future relationship with that student? And I'd love for you to think about, as you kind of, as we close here and you sign off, think about what you could have done differently to support the student, instead of what you did do. So just kind of thinking about that, thinking about what we've talked about tonight. Again, we don't have to share, but always good to have an opportunity to reflect about those things. Any questions? We'll close. I can't see Karen, so if you see anybody. No questions.
All right, I keep muting and unmuting myself, but I see, these strategies are great. Thanks, Susan. Hard with 40 students. Yes. Hard. And I wanted to let you all know that I put a link in the chat with a feedback survey. So you can see it there. It's right above Susan's comment. Okay.
Can you pop it in one more time? I don't see it.
Sure. I just did. Do you see it?
Thank you. Yeah, it's there. Yeah, there's a lot of students and not a lot of staff. Maybe pick one area of focus. Pick one area, like let's say the WOW strategy, for example, if it's something that you want to implement, because again, it comes back to language. Well, we're going to WOW now, right? So kids know what that's about. They know the strategy. You can start small, right? We don't have to tackle all of this at once, but
Just a small training piece for your staff or your, also it's like you could just train them in that. And, that would be like a very controlled PD, half an hour, for them if you have that.
For sure. Hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining us.